It is good to see you again. This time I'm a little bit drier than I was a few minutes ago. But it's always amazing to see what God is doing here, and we're just so grateful and so thankful that you have joined us. If you came in a little bit late, we just celebrated something called baptism, which is this beautiful picture of what we celebrated last week on Easter Sunday. And it's this beautiful practice that we get into by saying, hey, I want to embody the way of Jesus through the symbolism of being buried with him in his death and going under the water and then coming up out of the water representing life. And in kind of that vein of understanding and thinking through practicing the way of Jesus, which is a huge part of who we are as a church, I want to kind of talk through something that we're going to start today. We are beginning a several-week series on a practice that I think is honestly one of the most difficult practices for us as 21st century Western people in the church, okay? Or even people outside of the church. Now, before we get there, here's why we talk about practice. Yesterday, I had the amazing opportunity to go and watch my 6-year-old son play soccer, okay? That's why I had this amazing, farmer's tan right here. Yeah, it was awesome. And when you watch 6-year-olds play soccer, which is probably the most adorable thing you've ever seen, when they play soccer, really what it is this little black and white ball rolls down the field, and it's like a herd of cats just kind of follow the ball everywhere it goes, right? And it was funny because after we got done, I was talking to the coach, and she said, we didn't win, but that's okay, that's fine. But after we got done, the coach was like, that was a great practice. And I looked at her and I was like, how do you define practice? Help me understand what's happening here. She said, well, this week we didn't score in the wrong goal. That's a win, right? So every time we do it, it's a way of going, all right, we know how to do it better next time. We practice things because we don't naturally know how to do them. We practice things because our bodies tend to forget what it means to live a healthy lifestyle. So we do practice. Think of exercise, right? Or practicing a sport. And it's no different when we talk about practicing the way of Jesus. And here's why. You are a holistic creature. Body, mind, and soul all kind of mixed together. And so if all we do is show up and get fed with intellectual knowledge, that's only a third of the whole piece. So we've got to figure out a way to embody what Jesus has said as a way of practicing this and getting it into our souls. Knowledge is good. Don't get me wrong. But practicing helps us to put into our bodies the things that we're learning. So today we're going to start with the practice of Sabbath. The practice of Sabbath. Now, Sabbath, the word Sabbath, comes from the Hebrew word shabbat, which is just a lot of fun to say. So turn to your neighbor and just say, Shabbat. Oh, that's good. You're good. That's beautiful. Shabbat, which literally means to stop. And the first time this word is used is actually back in Genesis chapter 2. If you're not familiar with the Bible, Genesis is the first book of the story of God. And in Genesis chapter 2, God had been creating the entire world for 6 days. He's moving and shaking and sustaining and creating. And it's this beautiful, poetic, description of what's happening in the cosmos and in the heavens. And then we get to chapter 2, verse 1, which starts off by saying this. Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he, what? Rested. He shabbated on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. Now, I know we live in Nashville, and there's a lot of creatives in here who have made some pretty incredible things. I don't want to brag, but I make a pretty mean peanut butter and jelly sandwich, okay? It's quite tasty. Now, I don't know about you. I know that some of you have created some incredible things, and some of you are in charge of some immensely large corporations or projects. But I am pretty sure that I can guarantee that not a single person in this room has created the entire cosmos and then sustains it. Is that pretty safe to say? Yeah, I think we're safe there. So what we see here is that this pattern of God kind of creating for 6 days and then resting or stopping on the seventh was started at the very beginning of time. And Israel would kind of pick up on this and go, okay, we're going to work for 6 days and then rest on the seventh or stop on the seventh. And that's the idea. Sabbath is a time of stopping. And according to Jewish tradition, it's typically practiced from sundown on Friday to around sundown on Saturday. And what they would do is they would light these 2 candles on Friday evening around dinner time. The first one was called Zakor, and the second one was called Shamor, which literally means remembrance and observance. And it was a day set aside to simply stop, to be nourished physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. In fact, Jewish law had a list of 39 things that you were not allowed to do on Shabbat. Things like untying, like you had to wear Velcro shoes, right? Or you couldn't erase, so you weren't allowed to do math homework because there's a lot of erasing happening in my house, at least when it comes to math homework, right? It was these kind of things. You weren't allowed to bake. You weren't allowed to cut the grass. Things like this as a way of slowing down the hustle of life and spending time remembering who God is and observing the way in which God was moving in the world. One author said it was a way of adopting a 24/6 lifestyle. What happened, though, is Shabbat went from being this incredible tool that was used to create space in our life to becoming a rule used to oppress and manipulate and almost coerce people into good behavior. There was a story of Jesus and his friends, his disciples. They're walking through this wheat field on Shabbat. And as they're walking through this field, the disciples started getting hangry. So they just kind of instinctively picked up some grain and they kind of pulled it apart and started popping it in, like pistachio nuts. And the religious leaders of the time, the Pharisees, they went bananas. And they're like, you can't do that. Like, there's no snacking on the Sabbath. Like, you can't do that. It's illegal. And I love what Jesus' response to them was. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27, he says it this way. He says, but the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath. Meaning this was a time created, a tool to be used to create stoppage in our soul so that we could actually work from rest the rest of the week. But in the midst of that, it had become a very legalistic way of manipulating people. Now, I think in our day and age, we don't have that problem. Right? I think the pendulum kind of swung in the complete opposite direction. Right? In fact, practicing Sabbath or Shabbat is probably one of the most countercultural things we could ever do as followers of Jesus. Here's what I mean. I was looking at just some surveys this week on the way that we do and do not practice Sabbath and rest. And here's some things I came across. Did you know the average American works more hours in the week than the average worker of any peer nation? So think of other first world countries. Americans, when it comes to number of hours worked in a week, we got everybody beat. With that said, 22% of people who were surveyed responded that they were expected to receive and answer emails even when they're not at work. Almost like a quarter of the people. Some of you guys in here know exactly what I'm talking about. Your boss is like, hey, I know it's the weekend. I know you've been working for the weekend, but if you could work on the weekend, that'd be great too, right? Or, how about this? 50% of people check work on the weekend just in case. Another stat, 46% of people check work email on sick days, which means either you're not really sick and you're faking it really well, or we got a problem, right? How about this? 62% of Americans report having high levels of stress with feelings of extreme fatigue and like their life is out of control. Just statistically speaking, that's most of us in this room. The problem is so bad that the Japanese culture actually came up with a word for it. They call it karoshi. It literally means dying because you've been overworked. The World Health Organization in 2016 collected a bunch of data, and they discovered that in 2016, over 745,000 1,000 people worldwide died from a stroke or a heart attack directly related to overworking. And if you think that I'm talking about people that work 80, 90 hours a week, no. They define overworking as somebody who works more than 50 hours a week. Again, that's a lot of us in this room. Marketing companies, they understand that we have this desire to rest, right? We're kind of hardwired for this and that we need it. And so they're going after us, man. Like if you look, like 9 out of 10 ads that you see have some sort of rest or achievement to rest kind of hardwired into them. As a matter of fact, this week in researching for this sermon, I got an ad for ozone therapy, which I'd never heard before. But it was advertising saying that I could increase my energy and I could start feeling better today. Another ad popped up, right? As I was looking, I was like, that sounds cool. Like, let's look at that. Another ad popped up for a leather backpack that would, quote, fulfill all of my hiking adventures as I seek to escape the madness of the world. And I was like, I like packs. Let's go check that out. And as I was clicking on that, y'all, no lie, another ad popped up advertising a suicide hotline for people experiencing burnout. I think Google's worried about me. I recently was talking to a friend who is really kind of struggling, going through a really difficult season and just needing rest. And she said, okay, I'm going to pick up a book on Sabbath. But I need a place to go and read this. I can't read it at my house. It's too chaotic. So she decides to go to Starbucks. And she sits in Starbucks and she kind of sits down to read this book on rest and Sabbath. And as she's there, the espresso machine is doing its funky noise, right? Loud and overbearing. And at the same time, the baristas are calling out people's names as they're kind of trying to come up and get their orders. And then there's conversation all around us. And she said, you know, I went to go read a book on Sabbath, and I realized that all I could do was just sit and stare at the cover of the book, which was a hammock between two palm trees. And I thought, that looks really nice. I'd like to be there. We all feel this. And we're hardwired to need and desire rest, yet even with our time-saving gadgets, even with books on how to rest and the new technology, we can't actually lay a hold of it and draw it into our souls. So what do we do? What do we do? There's a lot of ways to approach this. But because we follow Jesus, and because we are apprentices of Jesus, we look first to Jesus to see what he has to say about this, which brings us to Matthew chapter 11. We're going to read through the passage in one chunk, and then we're going to break it down into some smaller chunks along the way. Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28. Jesus says this, "Come to me, all of you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." In these three verses, we find three invitations and a promise. Let's just kind of dive in. Invitation number one. Ready? Come to me. I don't know about the kind of house you grew up in, but I grew up in the kind of house where we had these things called come to Jesus meetings. Anybody? Right? You got in trouble? What happens? Oh, we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting. It was never like a positive thing, right? It was like, hey, you made your bed. Let's have a come to Jesus meeting. It was like, oh no, you hid your report card in the locker again. Liar. Let's have a come to Jesus meeting, okay? That's not what he's talking about here. Come to me. What Jesus says, that word come is actually the Greek word deute, which literally means to come and sit at a dinner table where there is food and wine or whatever beverage you want, and an opportunity to be in the presence of somebody who loves you and just wants to be with you. And that's Jesus' invitation. Come. Sit at my table. Feast with me in my presence. Doesn't that sound amazing? Yes. It's a dinner party. For who? I love it. For who? Come to me. Everybody who is weary and is carrying a heavy burden. The two words that Jesus uses here, that first word, weary, is the word kopiao, which is where we get our word copious from, which means a ridiculous amount of something. The word literally means weariness through beating. You ever felt like you've just been beaten? I mean, just life is just one thing after another, over and over again. Deadlines at work. You finish one, all of a sudden, boom, there's the next one. Right? Emails. Your inbox is numbering in the hundreds, if not the thousands, and you're going, I don't know how to respond to all these. Or maybe you feel beaten by family expectations. Like, I'm trying to be the best dad I can. I'm trying to be the best mom that I can. I'm trying to be a good kid and take care of my parents. I'm trying to be a good sibling, but just I can't meet these expectations. And then all the while you have that little inner voice inside of you that says, keep going. Keep going. You'll get there. It's not enough. Keep going. I won't ask for a show of hands, but if that's you, if you felt like that at any point in your life, you have felt kopiao. The other word Jesus uses here is the word fortizo, right? It means heavy burden or heavy laden. It is the process of loading a cargo ship, right? Imagine this big carriers down at the port, and they take those cranes and they load those cargoes, those containers on top of the boat, one after another after another. You ever been in a situation in your life where you just absolutely felt so tired and so overloaded, you weren't sure how to stop? We got a hamster at my house not too long ago. And those little jokers are fast. And they get on those little wheels, and they go, and they go, and they go. Did you know, this is free. Did you know hamsters can run 6 miles every night? That's bananas. Right? I can't even get out the front door. But think about it, they're running, but they never get anywhere. Right? Maybe for you, if this is you, your theme song is embodied and exemplified by the classic sung by Luisa Madrigal from the movie Encanto. Pressure like a drip, drip, drip that'll never stop. Whoa. Pressure that'll tip, 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 till you just go pop. Thank you. Give it to your sister. Your sister's older. Give her all the things that you can't shoulder. Who am I if I can't run with the ball? Pressure like a grip, 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 and it won't let go. All right, we're getting there. Pressure like a tick, 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 till it's ready to blow. Whoa! Give it to your sister. Your sister's stronger. See if she can hang on a little longer. And then the line that would classify many of us in this room: who am I if I can't carry it all? You ever feel like that? I know I have. And Jesus says, come. Come to if that's you, come to my table. And here's why. Because he says, if you come, I will give you rest. What's interesting about that word rest is it means to make somebody or something stop moving. You ever feel like your life is just going and you don't, I'd love to stop. I don't know where it starts. I don't know how to start stopping. It kind of reminds me of a very famous psalm, Psalm 23, which we read a lot at funerals and sometimes at weddings. The first line says this: the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Sometimes we can lie down, but sometimes we have to be made to lie down. Sometimes we don't know how to stop until we actually have to stop. When I was a kid, and I know this won't surprise any of you, but when I was in middle school, I was a skater. It's true. I had a skateboard. I didn't do the knee pads and the helmet because those were for dorks. I now know I should have, okay? But I remember I was a kid, and I would get on my skateboard, and I would ride down this hill. And it was a hill that had a curve, and I had learned how to time it with the speed flying down, and I could lean back and get that turn. And as soon as I did, man, I was in the home stretch. Well, one day in particular, I'm on my skateboard and I'm riding and I'm going to town. I go to do the turn and I made it and I'm like, yes! And I stood up and I didn't realize there was a rock right in front of my skateboard. My skateboard stopped. I did not. I went sliding across the pavement. It ripped the front of my shirt like completely clean. My pants were like all ripped up. I had road rash all over my body. You ever had a moment like that? Like you're going, wind in your hair, or what used to be hair, living the dream, and then a rock. The world stops, and you feel like you're sliding across the pavement. I mean, just this week, listen, I had conversations with a mom whose daughter is wasting away in front of her, and they feed her, and they're trying to do everything they can, and the doctors have no idea what's going on. Another friend of mine, speaking this week, is wrestling, trying to figure out how to cope because of a past abuse by a family member. Another friend of mine, actually multiple friends, wrestling with some sort of addiction. And then I think for me, the icing on the cake, if you will, was talking to a friend of mine, a pastor friend of mine, who was just like on the verge of quitting. He's burnt out and exhausted. My own story. Monday, August 17th, 2020. Most of you probably don't remember that day. I remember it very well. The week before was a week of just nothing but rain here in Nashville, which feels like every other week in Nashville at this point. And this building is 100 years old, or over 100 years old, actually. And so there are parts of this building that leak profusely. The women's restroom behind me actually would leak so much every time it rained, we used to call it the Rainforest Cafe. It was terrible. It was a week of rain, and I remember going into the week going, okay, I got to call the insurance adjuster again after I kind of mop up all this stuff and fill the buckets and kind of do all the things. And I'm sitting down trying to help my son, who's 4 years old at the time, trying to log him into pre-K on a computer, which if you want to know what torture is, that's it. I'm trying to get him logged in on this computer. And I've got all this stuff weighing on me. I'm trying to make appointments with the insurance adjuster. We just had some members who used to go here say, hey, we don't like what's happening. We're leaving. A lot of pressure, drip, drip, drip. There it is. And I'm sitting at my kitchen table, and I was trying to help my son log in, and I, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, was paralyzed. I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't move my arms. I could barely talk. Scared me. My wife asked, do we need to call an ambulance? Are you having a stroke? And I could barely squeak out, I don't know. After a few moments, it passed. I was talking to a friend of mine about it later on. He said, you should probably have a conversation with somebody. That's not normal. So I called up a friend of mine who's a therapist, and we just had a conversation. He said, Jason, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. What you had was called a randomized stuporous catatonic event. And he said, here's the thing. If you don't address this, if you don't learn how to stop, inside of 6 months, you will be suicidal. That got my attention. I'm a happy guy. I don't have those feelings, but I began to. We have to stop, or we will stop. You got me? So the invitation by Jesus is to come. Come to the table, which leads to the second invitation. How do we do this? He says it this way, take my yoke upon you. This literally means to pick up. Pick it up. Notice who's doing the action here. We are. A yoke is kind of this farming tool where you kind of put two animals together so they can share the load of work. It's an invitation by Jesus in a first century mindset to adopt his way of viewing and interacting with the world. And it sounds super counterintuitive, right? Because the invitation is to pick up what he's doing, to pick up his way of life and to do something. But here's the thing about the way of Jesus. I don't know why it works like this. I don't know how it always works like this, but what we discover about the way of Jesus is when we stop doing for us and we start doing through the lens of what He's called us to and living His way of life, there's something about stopping that sort of counteracts or sort of launches the rest of Jesus in our souls. Which then leads to the third invitation. Come to me, take my yoke, and then He says, learn from me. That word there, learn, is the Greek word mathete, which is where we get our word apprentice from. Right? Being a follower of Jesus, I don't know what your history of being in church is, but being a follower of Jesus is not about learning how to pray one prayer that gets you off the hook. It's not about just showing up on a Sunday. It's not about trying to just be a nice person. Being a follower of Jesus is learning how to view and interact with the world in which you live, including practicing the Sabbath as resistance. You could say Shabbat begins with apprenticeship. Now here at Hope, we define apprenticeship with three things. The first step is to be with Jesus. Being with Him, being in His presence, sitting at that table with Him. Because the more time you spend with somebody, the more the second thing is you become like them. You ever hang around a friend long enough and you begin picking up words that you're like, I didn't even know that was in my vocabulary. Ever since I met Joel Frame, I've started saying dope a lot more. I feel like it makes me cooler. My kids think it makes me look like a nerd. It's crazy. Some people can get away with it. I can't. But you spend time with somebody, right? And as you spend time with them, you become like them. And then eventually what happens? You end up doing what they did. It's the same thing with Jesus. You spend time in His presence, Shabbating, stopping in His presence. And then you become like Him. And then you go on to do what He did. Notice the order here. We like to start over here. Jesus is like, no. That's backwards. We got to start over here. Start with being. See, a lot of times we want the rest of Jesus, but we don't want the way of Jesus. And the way of Jesus starts by being with Him, Shabbating with Him. Now, I love, why does this matter? Why Jesus? Because let's be honest, there are a lot of books. There are a lot of great teachings out there. There's a lot of awesome technology, apps which can help you, wind down, right? Books on, why Jesus? I love this. He gives us an answer. He says it this way. Because I am gentle and humble in heart. That word gentle means unstirred. Unstirred. Humble in heart is another way of saying content. Jesus was unstirred and content. Think about His life. I mean, this guy, he's bringing people back from the dead. He's casting out demons. He's healing the sick. He's feeding people with a Lunchable. It's crazy, right? He's doing all this stuff. People want to be around him. His life is incredibly busy, a lot of demands. And yet He says, in the midst of all that, He's unstirred. And He's content, not trying to climb a corporate ladder, not trying to achieve something to impress somebody else. He's unstirred and content. And in the midst of this, here we get the promise. You ready? If we come to the table, if we take His yoke and learn from Him, we will find rest for our souls. We will find stoppage for the core of who we are. Here's the point. Sabbath begins with apprenticeship to Jesus. Taking His life and His teachings and His way of viewing the world and adopting them as your own. Being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and then doing what Jesus did. It's about stopping the busyness of your soul so that your life can be rightly oriented and then work from that space and not for that space. Or in Jesus' words, putting on His yoke and learning from Him. So how do we do this? I'm going to give you three very simple things. Okay, if you're a note taker, here we go. You ready? First, the first thing to do is remember that this is an invitation. This is not a law. It's not a command. It is an invitation to go deeper into community with Jesus and with others. Second, find a time to stop. If you want to go like old school, ancient Near Eastern culture, you can do sun up to sundown, Friday to Saturday. If you're like, hey, I got to start slow, just take a morning, take an afternoon, take an hour. But here's the thing, plan it. If your schedule's anything like mine, the time you don't plan will be planned for you, right? Plan it. Block it out. Busy to not be busy. And if you're like, hey, I'd love to do that, but I just can't. I got small kids. Y'all, I got 4 kids. I understand. This is a lot of times my excuse. Like, I can't do it. Let me just kind of go back to the beginning of this teaching and remind you of Genesis 2, 1 and 2, which says this, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the 7th day, God finished the work that he had done. And he, what? Rested. He shabbated from all the work he had done. A pastor friend of mine says it this way, if we don't have time to shabbat, we don't have time to be an apprentice of Jesus, because it starts with being. Which leads to the third practice, and this is the fun one. We practice this. We observe this. We slow down. I'm going to give you 10 things you can do on your day of not doing. All right? These are super uber practical, and they're a lot of fun. Here's number 1. Light candles. Like a way of starting this whole thing out, going, okay, we're going to start this way. We're going to kind of start our Friday night by lighting candles. Number 2, feast. Sabbath is not just a time to fast, although you can. It's actually a time to enjoy the fruits of what God has done in your life throughout the rest of the week. I love, one pastor said it this way. He said that they take a cast iron skillet and they make one of those giant chocolate chip cookies, and they put a tub of ice cream on top of that, and they sit around the table, loading up on carbs and celebrating what God had done in and for them throughout the week. That's a fun one. Third, read Scripture. Read Scripture. Start with the Gospel of John. It's a great one. It'll take you about an hour to read all the way through. Here's another one. Sing. Sing. There's something about expressing your soul through singing that brings deep joy and rest into your soul. Here's another one. Make time for intimacy. Did you know there's actually a command in the Talmud, which is sort of the Jewish commentary on the Old Testament, that says that men and women, husbands and wives, are commanded to be intimate on the Shabbat. You're welcome. Take time. Slow down. Enjoy one another. Here's another one. Walk. Be in nature. Go to Beeman Park or Shelby Bottoms, or just take a walk around your neighborhood. Be in nature. Be in God's creation. Another one, I love this one. Take a nap. One of my favorite words I learned this week is the word schluff. Can you say that with me? Schluff. You know what the word schluff means? It means nap. Take a Shabbat schluff. Get your schluff on. Whatever you got to do. Like have a schluff. Take a nap and rest. Spend time with family and close friends, feasting together. Invite them to the cookie buffet. Take time alone in the quiet. And then finally, practice gratitude. Practice gratitude. See, when we stop, we acknowledge that we do not have to keep going. It's a way of being in the presence of God without an agenda and acknowledging that everything we have comes from Him. This is an invitation to feast, to stop and be in the presence of God through the practice of Shabbat. But remember, with every practice, we have to say no to something which may be good in order to say yes to something better.